Hey everyone, hope you're doing great. Welcome back to my channel. In today's video, we'll dive into what if Deku hacked his own quirk and broke its limits. Smash that subscribe button, and be sure to peek at the description below. Let's begin. The air in Gamma Gym tasted of ozone and superheated concrete. It was a familiar, almost comforting flavor to Izuku Midoriya, a taste he had come to associate with progress, pain, and the relentless pursuit of an impossible ideal. The vast cavern of a training facility, affectionately nicknamed the Terrain Destruction Lab, was a latticework of steel girders and reinforced walls, all of it pockmarked and scarred from generations of UA's most powerful students unleashing their quirks. Today, it was their canvas, and the masterpiece being painted was one of controlled, chaotic violence. A concussive roar ripped through the air as Katsuki Bakugo, a human comet streaked in orange and black, propelled himself off a towering pillar of ice. "Too slow, you damn nerd," he snarled, his voice a gravelly echo in the enormous space. His gauntlets, the grenadier bracers, were already glinting with the telltale light of stored nitroglycerin sweat. Izuku's own senses were a symphony of overwhelming data. Danger sense was a low, persistent thrum at the base of his skull, a constant warning system that had been humming since the spar began. It spiked sharply, a piercing needle of alarm focused on Bakugo's trajectory. He didn't need to look, he felt the attack vector. "He's angling for my back," using the glare from Shoto's eyes to obscure his approach, Izuku calculated, his mind a whirlwind of variables. AP shot. High concentration, low blast radius. He wants to pierce, not just blast. Instead of dodging, Izuku dug his iron-soled boots into the floor. He dropped his center of gravity, letting the kinetic energy from his last movement flow into his legs. This was Fa Gene, the fourth user's quirk, a power that felt less like a part of him and more like a capacitor he had to consciously charge and discharge. He could feel the stored energy humming within his muscle fibers, a coiled spring begging for release. Tendrils of pure, dark energy erupted from his back and arms. Black Whip. The quirk was more intuitive now, an extension of his will, but it still required focus. He sent 6 tendrils snapping into the floor and surrounding debris, creating a complex anchor system. The world seemed to slow. Bakugo, mid-flight, pulled back his arm. A pinprick of brilliant light formed at his palm. Todoroki, from across the field, was already moving, his right foot sliding forward, a wave of frost chasing his motion, aiming to trap Izuku's newly created anchors. It was a perfectly executed pincer movement. Bakugo for the direct assault, Todoroki for control and support. They had grown terrifyingly efficient as a team. If I dodge Bakugo, Todoroki's ice pins me for a follow-up. If I break the ice, AP shot hits me clean. The problem presented itself in his mind like a complex equation. But equations had solutions. One for all 30%, he muttered, the words a soft prayer to the power thrumming beneath his skin. Green lightning, wild and untamed, crackled around him. He felt the familiar strain, the tight burn in his muscles that promised pain if he pushed even a fraction too far. He released the stored energy from Fa Gene in a single, explosive burst, not through his fists, but through his entire body. The result wasn't a smash, but a shockwave. A full-call kinetic boost. The ground beneath him fractured. The immediate area of effect shattered Todoroki's advancing ice wave into a glittering cloud of frozen dust. The same burst of energy propelled him upwards, a green blur escaping the pincer. He used Black Whip to latch onto a high girder, swinging himself over Bakugo's attack. The focus beam of AP shot seared the air where his chest had been a millisecond earlier, punching a perfectly round, molten hole in the floor. He landed 50 feet away, breathing heavily. The thrum of danger sense subsided to its baseline hum. He had navigated the threat, but it had cost him. He'd used 3 of his 6 quirks in rapid succession, and the mental gymnastics required were exhausting. He felt like a pilot trying to fly a futuristic jet where every control system was from a different manufacturer and written in a different language. "Not bad," Todoroki called out, his voice even and calm. A sheet of flame erupted from his left side, melting the remnants of his own ice wall, clearing his line of sight. "Your control over the new quirks is improving. But your power output is inconsistent." He was right. The kinetic boost had been powerful, but messy. Izuku could feel the ghost of wasted energy, a residual heat that sank into his bones, a sign of inefficiency. It was like revving an engine into the red just to make a simple turn. Stop complimenting him, icy hot! Bakugo bellowed, landing with a loud clang of his metal saws. He was grinning, a feral, challenging expression that spoke of genuine excitement. He's still got a governor on that engine. All that fancy dancing around, and you still haven't even tried to land a real hit on me. Bakugo was goading him, and it was working. The competitive fire that had defined their relationship for years roared to life in Izuku's chest. He knew what Bakugo was asking for. Not a feint, not a trick, not a multi-quirk combination. He wanted a straight comparison. Power against power. An opening appeared. Bakugo, in his taunting, had planted his feet. Todoroki was too far away to interfere immediately. This was it. A chance to use the combination he'd been practicing, the one that promised the greatest destructive potential. AFA gene-boosted smash. He began the sequence. He pumped his arms, short, sharp movements, building kinetic energy with FA gene. He could feel the power accumulating, a buzzing, electric charge that made the hairs on his arms stand up. Black whip tendrils shot out, anchoring him for the recoil he knew was coming. He drew on the core of One for All, pulling a specific percentage, target 35%. FA gene charge at 80% capacity. This should create an output equivalent to a 45% smash, but with the recoil of a 30%. The physics works. The numbers add up. His mind was an abacus, clicking through the calculations. He saw Bakugo's eyes widen slightly. He knew what was coming. He braced himself, a defiant grin plastered on his face. Izuku reared back his arm. The green lightning of One for All swirled around his limb, intermixing with a fainter, more subtle silver shimmer from the stored kinetic energy of FA gene. The two powers felt discordant, like two different currents of electricity being forced through the same wire. Smash! He roared, a cry of effort and desperate hope. He threw the punch. For a glorious, infinitesimally small moment, it felt perfect. The power surged forward, a tidal wave of force contained within his fist. Then, the system buckled. The energy flow wasn't clean. It was a chaotic, violent flood. The FA gene energy didn't perfectly synergize with the One for All energy. They collided. It was a bottleneck, a jam in the metaphysical pathways of his own body. He felt a sharp, sickening lurch in his shoulder and a familiar, searing agony shot through the bones of his forearm. The resulting blast was immense, but uncontrolled. It wasn't the focused piston of force he had envisioned, but a wide, explosive cone of air pressure. It ripped up the floor panels between them and kicked up a massive cloud of dust, but Bakugo, having anticipated the general direction, was able to absorb most of it with a wide-area defensive explosion of his own. When the dust settled, Bakugo was still standing, feet dug into a newly formed crater, his uniform singed but his body unharmed. He was scowling. Izuku, however, was on one knee, clutching his right arm. The green lightning had sputtered out. The limb was screaming in protest, not broken like in the old days, but fractured with a deep, resonating pain that spoke of micro-tears in his muscles and ligaments. The recoil. It always came back to the recoil. TCH. Bakugo straightened up, dusting off his shoulder. The grin was gone, replaced by a look of unimpressed frustration. That's it? All that build-up for a firecracker? You poured a whole bucket of water through a garden hose, Deku. He turned away, deactivating his gauntlets with a hiss. Still got a governor on that engine. You'll never beat Shigaraki if you're still fighting your own damn body. The words hit harder than any punch could have. From the observation deck above, Izuku could feel a pair of eyes on him. He glanced up to see the skeletal, worried form of All Might, who gave him a weak, encouraging smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. It only made the feeling of failure sink deeper. The spar was over. Todoroki walked over and offered a hand, his expression unreadable as always, but with a flicker of concern in his heterochromatic eyes. Izuku took it, hissing as he put pressure on his aching arm. He had all this power. The legacy of 8 heroes living inside him. And yet he was still stuck at the same roadblock. He wasn't fighting his opponents. He was fighting the very quirk he was trying to master. He was fighting the bottleneck. Later that evening, the muted glow of a computer monitor was the only light in Izuku Midoriya's dorm room. The space was a monument to organized obsession. One wall was still dominated by all-might posters and merchandise, relics of a simpler, more innocent time. But the other walls, his desk, and even parts of the floor were covered in a sprawling collage of data. There were notebooks filled with his cramped, frantic handwriting, diagrams of his own musculature, charts plotting power output against stamina drain, and complex graphs detailing the activation times for each of his auxiliary quirks. On his desk, his computer, a high-spec machine he'd requested specifically for data analysis, displayed a frame-by-frame video breakdown of the afternoon's spar. He winced as he rewatched the final punch in slow motion. On the screen, a thermographic overlay showed the energy distribution. He could see it clear as day, the brilliant, white-hot concentration of energy in his fist, but also the chaotic spray of wasted power, represented by angry red and orange blooms flaring up his arm, his shoulder, even his torso. It was a visual representation of his failure. A heat map of his own inefficiency. His right arm, now wrapped in a compression sleeve, throbbed in time with his pulse. Recovery Girl had healed the worst of the strain, but the deep, phantom ache remained, a physical reminder of his limits. He pulled up a corresponding data log from the biometric sensors woven into his hero costume. The numbers confirmed what he already knew. Event OFA/Fajin combo strike. OFA output target, 35%. Fajin charge, discharge 80%. Kinetic output, effective, 2,800 kilonewtons. Recoil damage, biofeedback, 17.8%. Ligament/tendon stress. Energy efficiency 62%. 62%. Nearly 40% of the power he had channeled for that one crucial attack had been utterly wasted. It had turned inwards, chewing up his own body as recoil, or dissipating harmlessly as unfocused light and heat. It was, in a word, pathetic. He leaned back in his chair, the worn springs groaning in protest. He ran a hand through his unruly green hair, his mind racing. He had been approaching this problem from one angle, and one angle only: physical conditioning. For years, the answer had been to make his body a stronger vessel. He'd trained relentlessly, building muscle, strengthening his bones, pushing his physical limits until he could withstand higher and higher percentages of one for all. But he was hitting a wall. His body was about as optimized as a human body could get. The problem wasn't the hardware anymore. Pushing himself further would only yield marginal returns. The issue was deeper, more fundamental. He looked at Bakugo's data from the spar. Bakugo's power output was a series of clean, sharp spikes. His efficiency was consistently in the high 90s. He generated power, he aimed it, he fired it. There was almost no waste. His quirk was a perfectly designed rifle. Then he looked at Todoroki's. His was a testament to control. He could maintain a constant stream of thermal energy, raising or lowering the temperature with minute precision. His efficiency was all about regulation, maintaining a delicate balance. His quirk was a state-of-the-art climate control system. Izuku's quirk, by contrast, was a mess. His power output graph looked like a seismograph during an earthquake, jagged, unpredictable, and chaotic. He wasn't a rifle or a climate control system. He was a barely contained nuclear reactor, leaking radiation and threatening a meltdown with every spike in output. Frustration coiled in his gut. He had more raw power than anyone he knew. He had the versatility of 6 quirks. And yet, that very complexity was his undoing. Accessing the other quirks felt clumsy, like fumbling for different keys on a massive, disorganized keychain in the middle of a fire. FA gene, black whip, smokescreen, danger sense, float. They didn't feel like a unified whole. They felt like separate, poorly integrated programs all running on the same machine, each one hogging processing power and causing the entire system to lag. He slammed his fist on the desk, rattling a stack of notebooks. Why? He whispered to the empty room. Why can't I make it work? His gaze fell on his computer screen, away from the fight analysis. A small window was open in the corner, a system diagnostic he had been running on the computer's hard drive. It was a routine bit of maintenance, but now, the words on the screen seemed to leap out at him, imbued with a strange, new significance. System health 94%. Issues detected. High file fragmentation. Latency in memory recall. Inefficient code and background processes. Packet loss detected in network connection. Izuku stared, his breath catching in his throat. Latency. Inefficient code. Packet loss. He looked from the diagnostic window to the graph of his own Quirk's power output. He looked at the wasted energy, the chaotic spikes, the delayed activation of Blackwhip by a crucial 0.2 seconds, the miscalculation of Fa Jin's stored power. The patterns were the same. A jolt, more powerful than any surge of One for All, shot through him. It was an epiphany so profound, so paradigm-shifting, that it left him breathless. His entire understanding of his own power, of Quirks in general, tilted on its axis. He had been using the wrong metaphor. One for All wasn't a muscle to be trained. It wasn't a well of power to be drawn from. It was a system. A biological operating system. The idea, once formed, snowballed with terrifying speed and clarity. His mind, so adept at analysis, latched onto the concept and began to build a new framework, a new reality. Yoichi Shigaraki, the first user, created the base OS. A simple, elegant Quirk designed to be transferred. It was OFA version 1.0. Its only function was transfer.exe. When it was passed on, it merged with the second user's Quirk. That Quirk was like a new piece of software, crudely patched onto the original code. The process repeated, again and again. Nana Shimura's float, Haikyuu Shinomori's danger sense. They weren't just added to a stockpile. They were new applications installed onto the OS, each one modifying the source code, adding complexity, adding potential bugs. The stockpile of power? That wasn't a pool. It was the central power unit, the PSU, growing in capacity with each generation. But the wiring connecting it to the new applications was never properly designed. It was a haphazard, jury-rigged network. And me? I'm the 9th user. I'm the new hardware, the new processor. But I'm trying to run a legacy operating system that's been updated 8 times without a single clean install. It's bloated, inefficient, and full of corrupted files and redundant code. The failed punch wasn't a physical failure. It was a system crash. He tried to run 2 resource-heavy applications, OFA and FA Gene, simultaneously, and the processor, his body, couldn't handle the load because the underlying code was a mess. The system had tried to execute the command, encountered a conflict, and the result was a massive error log written in the language of pain across his own nervous system. The recoil wasn't just recoil, it was a system error. It was packet loss. He grabbed a fresh notebook, his hands trembling with the thrilling, terrifying weight of his discovery. The All Might smash. Pen he picked up felt absurdly out of place. He flipped to the first page and, at the top, wrote in big block letters, One for All System Analysis. His entire goal shifted in that instant. The question was no longer how can I make my body stronger? It was now, how can I optimize the code? He couldn't just keep throwing more processing power at a broken operating system. It was unsustainable. He needed to go inside. He needed to defragment the hard drive, clean the registry, streamline the code. He needed to rewrite the very source of his power. But how? He couldn't plug a cable into his brain. He couldn't run a diagnostic tool on his own DNA. What was his interface? The vestiges. The vestige world, that strange, ethereal plane of consciousness where the previous users resided. He had always approached it as a student visiting his masters, seeking guidance, history, and encouragement. He would enter, speak with Nana or Yoichi, and then leave. He had been treating it like a conference room. He now realized it was the server room. The vestiges weren't just ghosts in the machine. They were the machine. Their consciousnesses, their quirks, their wills. They formed the very architecture of the OFA network. His new goal crystallized, sharp and clear. He wouldn't go into the vestige world to talk. He would go there to observe. He wouldn't ask for advice. He would run a diagnostic. He had to map the flow of energy. He needed to see the data lines that connected the core stockpile to the individual Quirk modules. He had to identify the bottlenecks, the latency, the sources of the corruption. He had to stop being a user and start being an administrator. A strange calm settled over him, the frantic energy of his epiphany solidifying into cold, hard purpose. He knew what he had to do. The physical training was still important. A better processor could always handle more. But the real work, the work that would truly unlock his potential and break his limits, would be done in the quiet of his own mind. He pushed his chair back from the desk, walked to the center of his room, and sat down on the floor, crossing his legs. He closed his eyes, shutting out the data-plastered walls and the glowing computer screen. He regulated his breathing, just as Gran Torino had taught him, but his objective was different now. He wasn't trying to feel the power. He wasn't trying to spread it through his body. He was trying to let go of the physical, to sink his consciousness deep into the system that lived within him. "All right," he whispered to the silent counsel in his soul. "Let's see what's under the hood." He took one last, deep breath and focused inward, pushing past the thrum of his own blood and the beat of his own heart, reaching for the crackling, electric reality of One for All. He wasn't entering the front door to chat with the residents. He was looking for the back door. He was looking for root access. The faint green lightning of One for All began to flicker around his still form, but it was different. It was softer, quieter, more inquisitive. It was a system, waiting for a command. And for the first time, Izuku Midoriya was beginning to learn the language it was written in. The silence of 3 a.m. in the Heights Alliance dormitory was a thick, heavy blanket, punctuated only by the soft hum of the building's life support and the distant, rhythmic snoring of Minoru Mineta from down the hall. For Izuku Midoriya, however, the silence was a laboratory. It was the clean, controlled environment he needed to conduct the most important experiment of his life. He sat cross-legged on the cold floor of his room, the All Might posters on his wall seeming to watch him with their eternally optimistic, painted smiles. They were icons of a bygone era, of a simpler way of understanding power. Smash. Save. Win. It was a philosophy of the heart, a doctrine of raw, overwhelming will. Izuku revered it, but he knew, with the chilling certainty of his recent epiphany, that it was no longer enough. The problems he faced were too complex for a simple smash. The enemy was too insidious. The quirk inside him was too broken. He closed his eyes, his breathing slow and measured. This was not like his usual meditation, where he sought to feel the flow of One for All in his limbs, to coax it into behaving. This was a targeted, intellectual exercise. He wasn't trying to connect to his quirk. He was trying to log in. He envisioned the boundary between his conscious mind and the inner world of One for All not as a door, but as a firewall, a complex barrier of biological and metaphysical code designed to protect the user from the overwhelming reality of the quirk. His previous entries had been the equivalent of being granted temporary guest passes by the vestiges themselves, usually triggered by high emotion or extreme stress. This time, he was coming in with the administrator password. A password he didn't know, but one he believed his own will, as the ninth and current user, could create. He focused his intent, not on power, but on access. "Show me the source code," he thought, the words forming a silent command. "Show me the system architecture." The transition was jarringly different. There was no gentle pull, no dreamlike fade. It was like breaching a digital wall. A split second of sensory static, a flash of green, code-like light behind his eyelids, and then he was in. He stood on a vast, dark plain under a perpetually stormy sky. This was the vestige world, but his new perspective painted it in a terrifyingly new light. The air didn't feel like air. It was a medium thick with crackling, raw data. The ground beneath his feet wasn't solid. It was a compressed foundation of dormant energy, vibrating with immense potential. He could feel the sheer, unbridled power of the core stockpile, not as a distant star, but as a constant, oppressive pressure from all directions, like being at the bottom of a deep ocean. And the storm, it wasn't a storm of clouds and lightning. It was a storm of energy. He could see it now. Wild, untamed torrents of green One for All power arced across the sky, colliding, branching, and dissipating into nothingness. It was a spectacular, breathtakingly beautiful light show of pure inefficiency. Billions of kilowatts of power were being expended every second on absolutely nothing. In the distance stood the vestiges, as they always did. 8 figures, bathed in their own ethereal light. But he wasn't looking at them as his predecessors anymore. He saw them for what they were in his new paradigm's server nodes. Each one was a living terminal that housed a specific application, a quirk, and processed its connection to the main network. He made a conscious decision to stay where he was, at the periphery, the edge of the processing space. He didn't walk forward to greet them. He simply stood, and he observed. His presence, and his unusual behavior, did not go unnoticed. The first to react was Yoichi Shigaraki, the first user. His form, usually a wispy, gentle light, flickered with curiosity. He turned his head, his gaze piercing the gloom and locking directly onto Izuku's observing consciousness. A silent question seemed to pass between them. What is this? Nana Shimura, the seventh, floated a few feet off the ground, her arms crossed. A frown creased her spectral features. Her usual warmth was replaced by a palpable sense of concern. She felt the difference. He wasn't here to commune. He was here to analyze. Izuku ignored their silent inquiries, his focus absolute. He began to trace the connections, his mind's eye following the chaotic pathways of energy. He saw the core of One for All, the source of the storm. It wasn't a sun or a star. It was a singularity, a churning, chaotic nexus of power so dense it warped the very fabric of this mental world around it. The main power line. From this singularity, countless connections snaked outwards. He focused on the line leading to Daigoro Banjo, the fifth user. It wasn't a clean cable. It was a thick, thorny vine of pulsing black and green energy, lashing about like a living thing. The data stream for Black Whip was volatile, temperamental. It explained why the quirk was so heavily influenced by his emotions. Its very connection was written in the language of chaos. He shifted his focus to N, the sixth user. The connection to his node was a swirling, murky fog, the smokescreen data line a constantly shifting and obscuring cloud that seemed to sap light and energy from its surroundings. It was inherently designed for stealth and misdirection, making a clean power draw difficult. Nana Shimura's float was a gossamer thin, shimmering thread, beautiful but seemingly fragile, prone to fluctuations from the ambient energy storm around it. He saw it all. The entire network was a masterpiece of accidental, jury-rigged design. It was a miracle it functioned at all. Each new user had essentially soldered their quirk onto the main board without a schematic, creating interference, power drains, and system conflicts that had been compounding for nearly a century. His theory was correct. The bottleneck wasn't in his body. It was right here, in the fundamental architecture of One for All itself. Now for the hack, he thought, a thrill of nervous excitement running through him. I can't rewrite the whole OS. Not yet. But I can create a temporary bypass. A script. A macro. He focused back on the central singularity, the roaring core of the stockpile. He wouldn't try to tame it. Instead, he would perform the most delicate surgery imaginable. He ignored the massive, lashing tentacles of power and searched for something small, something manageable. There. A single, hair-thin filament of pure, stable energy, leaking from the core like a solar flare. He reached out with his will, not his hand. He envisioned his consciousness as a command line prompt, a cursor blinking in the void. He typed a silent command: isolate stream 001. The filament trembled. Back in the physical world, a single bead of sweat traced a path down Izuku's temple. The mental strain was immense. It was like trying to perform microsurgery with a crowbar. The vestiges were now all looking at him. His targeted tampering with the core was something they had never experienced. It was a direct, focused manipulation of the quirk's essence. Daigoro's form flickered. What's the kid doing? His voice echoed, not in Izuku's ears, but in the very substrate of the world. He's not drawing power. He's directing it. Izuku pushed harder. This filament is my fiber optic cable, he thought, reinforcing the metaphor in his mind. The rest of the storm is just noise, static, inefficient copper wiring. He began to construct the pathway. He visualized a perfectly insulated, perfectly efficient conduit. It began at the isolated filament, bypassed Daigoro's chaotic Black Whip node entirely, skirted the obscuring fog of smokescreen, and ran in a clean, straight line through the mental representation of his own body, from his core, down his arm, and terminating in the palm of his right hand. He wasn't asking for a flood. He was requesting a single, clean packet of data. Route stream 001 terminal DKU output right fist. A strange thing happened. The moment he defined the path, the filament of energy snapped to it. It flowed, without resistance or waste, through the virtual channel he had created. In the vestige world, a single, pure green line of light cut through the storm, a beacon of perfect order in a sea of chaos. Yoichi's spectral eyes widened. He felt it. A tiny, infinitesimally small part of the quirk he had created was, for the first time, behaving with perfect logic. The sensation was so jarring that it booted Izuku from the vestige world. He gasped, his eyes flying open. His room was exactly as he'd left it, silent and dark, but his right arm was tingling, a low, electric hum resonating deep in his bones. He could feel it. The connection. The open pathway. It was waiting for an execution command. The next day, Izuku bypassed the main gym, heading instead to Training Ground Beta. It was a smaller, more controlled facility designed for quirk diagnostics and precision testing. A row of reinforced plasteel walls stood on one side, and on the other, a series of high-density impact dummies, each wired with a host of sensors to measure force, temperature, and energy distribution. He stood before the primary dummy, a hulking humanoid shape made of a self-repairing polymer. A large display screen was mounted on the wall beside it, currently reading a flat 0 across all metrics. Normally, he would begin by stretching, warming up his body to accept the strain of one for all. Today, he stood perfectly still. His body was just the hardware. The important work was already done. He took a deep breath and closed his eyes, accessing the mental pathway he had forged. It was still there, a faint, glowing line in his mind's eye. A stable connection. Requesting a 5% draw, he thought. This was the part that felt the strangest. He wasn't taking the power. He was sending a request down the line he had built. He felt a gentle, controlled surge of energy flow from the core, not into his whole body, but directly into that single, insulated channel. There was no explosive feeling, no sense of his body being overwhelmed. It was clean. He opened his eyes and looked at his right arm. A breathtaking sight met his gaze. Underneath his skin, faint lines of brilliant green light had appeared. They weren't the wild, jagged bolts of his usual full-cow lightning. These were precise, geometric patterns branching from his shoulder down to his knuckles like the traces on a printed circuit board. They pulsed with a soft, steady light, a visual confirmation that the system was running. He planted his feet, his posture mirroring the countless times he had thrown this exact punch. But the feeling was alien. There was no strain. No warning tremor in his muscles. No sense of his bones creaking under an imminent load. There was only the low, confident hum of perfectly channeled energy. He didn't shout. He didn't roar. He simply executed the command, Detroit Smash. The movement was fluid, economical. His fist shot forward, connecting with the center of the dummy's torso. The sound was not the deafening boom he was used to. It was a sharp, resonant crack, like a giant's whip breaking the sound barrier. The impact was instantaneous and devastatingly focused. Instead of a wide shockwave that would have rattled the entire room, the force was delivered to a single, fist-sized point. The dummy didn't fly backwards off its moorings. The magnetic anchors held it in place. Instead, the polymer on its torso imploded. A perfect, deep crater was punched into its chest, the edges of the hole glowing faintly with residual energy. Izuku held his follow-through for a second, his fist still extended. The glowing circuit patterns on his arm flashed brilliantly, then faded, leaving his skin completely unmarked. He lowered his arm, his heart hammering in his chest. He looked at his hand, flexing his fingers. There was no pain. There was no recoil. Not a single twinge in his knuckles. Not a hint of an ache in his forearm. Not even the phantom burn he usually felt after a low-powered smash. His arm felt as if he had just thrown a lazy punch at the air. He stumbled back a step, his breath catching in his throat. His wide eyes darted to the monitor on the wall. The numbers were frozen on the screen, a testament to what he had just done. Impact force 9,120 kilonewtons. Energy dispersion 0.8%, heat/sound. Recall feedback, user 0.01%, efficiency rating 99.18%. His mind struggled to process the data. 9,120 kilonewtons. He quickly did the math. A standard 5% smash from him usually registered around 2,200 to 2,300 knots. The punch he had just thrown, using what felt like a tiny fraction of his power, had an output equivalent to a clean, focused 20% smash. He had quadrupled his effective power output on a low-end strike, and his efficiency was near perfect. The 0.01% recoil was statistically insignificant, the equivalent of the strain from simply throwing a normal punch. He stared at his hand, then back at the ruined dummy, then at the numbers on the screen. It was a holy trinity of undeniable proof. A slow, incredulous smile spread across his face, followed by a shaky, breathless laugh. It wasn't a laugh of joy or triumph. It was a laugh of pure, unadulterated shock. The laugh of a man who had just discovered a fundamental law of physics was merely a suggestion. "It's not stronger," he whispered, the words filled with awe. "It's not more power, it's perfect power. I didn't turn up the volume. I eliminated the static." The implications washed over him in a dizzying wave. If he could do this with a simple punch, what else could he do? Could he apply the same principle to Blackwhip? Create tendrils with pinpoint precision and no emotional feedback? Could he use FAG not as a clumsy kinetic bomb, but as a surgical booster pack, applying tiny, perfectly calculated bursts of energy to alter his trajectory mid-air? The possibilities were infinite. He had been trying to build a castle with mismatched, crumbling bricks. Now, he had found the quarry and the blueprints to forge his own. A familiar voice, filled with a mixture of pride and surprise, echoed from the entrance to the training ground. "Young Midoriya!" That was incredible. Izuku spun around, his heart leaping into his throat. All Might stood there in his skeletal form, a thermos in one hand and a wide, beaming smile on his face. He must have been monitoring the training logs from his office and come down to see for himself. "Your control is reaching new heights." That was so clean, so focused. All Might said, walking closer and looking at the mangled dummy with approval. I barely felt the tremor from the observation room. "What was that, 30%? You managed to channel it with hardly any visible strain." Izuku's mind raced. How could he possibly explain? "Well, All Might, I treated One for All like a legacy operating system and used my consciousness as a command line interface to create a direct data pathway, bypassing the network latency of the vestige nodes." He could already see the confused, deeply concerned look on his mentor's face. All Might understood power as a function of will, spirit, and muscle. His own use of One for All had been the pinnacle of that philosophy, a raging, beautiful inferno of heroic intent. How could he explain that he was treating that sacred fire like a faulty motherboard, that he was approaching this grand legacy of heroes not as a successor, but as a system administrator? He couldn't. Not yet. It was too new, too strange. All might think he was losing his mind, or worse, losing his heart, a sentiment Bakugo had already accused him of. So, he fell back on a partial truth, a cover story that was plausible enough to work. "Ah, thank you, All Might," Izuku said, trying to sound enthusiastic and not like a man who had just fundamentally rewritten his own reality. I've been working on a new mental technique. Instead of just pushing the power out, I'm trying to guide it more precisely. Focusing my intent, to minimize any wasted movement and energy." All Might's smile widened. "Aha! A breakthrough in mind-body unity. Wonderful! That is the core of true mastery. Not just wielding power, but becoming one with it. I knew you had it in you, my boy. This changes things. This level of control will be invaluable." Izuku forced a smile, but a pang of guilt resonated in his chest. He was deceiving his mentor, the man who had given him everything. But as he looked at All Might's hopeful, proud face, he knew he had made the right choice. To protect him from a truth he wouldn't understand. To protect his own discovery until he could fully grasp its implications. "I hope so, All Might," he said, his voice quiet. All Might clapped him on the shoulder, the bony hand a familiar, comforting weight. Keep up the great work, young Midoriya. You make me proud. As his mentor turned and walked away, Izuku looked back at his hand. He could still feel the phantom sensation of the circuits, the memory of that clean, perfect flow of energy. He had gained root access. He had unlocked a power beyond his wildest dreams. But in that moment, as he stood alone in the sterile silence of the training ground, he felt a profound and unsettling sense of isolation. He was on a path no other one for all user had ever walked. It was a path of unprecedented power, but it was a path he would have to walk utterly and completely alone. The architect of a new age, with no one to read his blueprints. The lecture on advanced Quirk theory by Professor Ectoplasm was, for most of Class 1A, a hypnotic drone of complex equations and abstract principles. But for Izuku Midoriya, it was a lifeline. It was a language that helped him frame the whirlwind of discovery happening inside his own soul. He scribbled notes with a feverish intensity, his pen scratching across the page, not just transcribing Ectoplasm's words, but cross-referencing them with his own nascent theories on one-for-all system architecture. The refractory period of an emitter-type quirk is not a failure of stamina, but a biological failsafe to prevent systemic overload on the quirk factor itself. Consider it a forced cooldown on a CPU. Izuku's pen flew. This explains the recoil. It's not just physical damage. It's the OS forcing a hardware shutdown to prevent a total system crash. My direct pathway method bypasses this failsafe because the energy load is so efficient it never triggers the alarm. He was so absorbed in his annotation that he didn't notice it at first. The feeling was subtle, a foreignness and emotion he had performed millions of times. The pen in his hand felt different. The angle of his grip had shifted, his knuckles more pronounced. He glanced down at the last sentence he had written. His breath hitched. The handwriting was not his own. His usual script was a cramped, slightly rounded scrawl, a product of years of trying to write down thoughts faster than his hand could move. The words now on the page were starkly different. They were sharp, angular, and possessed a severe, almost archaic neatness. Each letter was formed with an aggressive precision, the downstrokes heavy, the cross on the T a decisive, cutting slash. It was brutally efficient, like a military cipher. He stared at the sentence, a cold dread washing over him that had nothing to do with danger sense. He hadn't consciously changed his writing. His hand had simply moved, and this alien script had emerged. He tried to write the next word, forcing his familiar, rounded style. It felt like fighting a current, his muscles bunched and awkward. After a moment, without his express permission, his grip shifted back, and the sharp, unfamiliar handwriting returned, flowing with an eerie, practiced ease. He slammed his notebook shut with a loud clap that earned him a scolding glare from Ectoplasm. His heart hammered against his ribs. This wasn't a feature. This wasn't an upgrade. This was a bug, a critical, terrifying bug. The firewall. His mind screamed, the thought a flash of pure panic. By streamlining the power, I must have lowered the firewall between my consciousness and the vestiges. It wasn't just his handwriting. Over the next few days, the glitches began to multiply. He would be walking down the corridor to lunch, and for 2 terrifying seconds, the floor would seem to fall away, replaced by a phantom sensation of weightlessness, of floating effortlessly a few inches off the ground. He would stumble, catching himself on a wall, the solid linoleum feeling alien under his feet. He knew, instinctively, that it was Nana Shimura's influence bleeding through, her quirk no longer a tool to be activated but a latent memory seeping into his own proprioception. Another time, while sparring with Kirishima, he found himself instinctively dropping into a low, predatory crouch he had never practiced, his hands held like claws. His movements became more brutal, more direct. A style focused on overwhelming force and ending a fight in seconds. Kirishima, ever resilient, took the hits with a grin. Whoa, Midoriya, that's a manly new style. Super aggressive. But Izuku felt a chill. The posture, the mindset, it didn't feel like his. It felt old. Ancient and angry. He suspected it belonged to the second or third user, the mysterious figures who had lived and died in a far darker, more violent era. These were more than just quirks of behavior. They were fragments of other people's lives, other people's instincts, overriding his own. He was debugging the code of One for All, but in doing so, he seemed to be corrupting the code of Izuku Midoriya. The breaking point came late one night. He was meditating, attempting to map the data lines to FA gene, when a voice slithered into his mind. It wasn't the clear, encouraging voice of a vestige he was used to. It was faint, distorted, like a radio signal struggling to break through miles of static. It was a whisper that felt both infinitely far away and directly inside his own skull. "What are you doing to us, Ninth?" Izuku's eyes snapped open, his body drenched in a cold sweat. The room was empty, silent. But the voice, the pained, deeply concerned tone of it, echoed in his memory. He recognized the cadence, the gentle spirit behind the distortion. It was Yoichi. The first. The origin. The question hung in the air, a devastating accusation. "What are you doing to us?" He had been so focused on optimizing the system, he had never stopped to consider the impact on its living components. The vestiges weren't just old software. They were consciousnesses, trapped in the network he was so recklessly rewriting. His attempts to streamline their quirks were directly affecting them, pulling their very identities apart, and letting the pieces bleed into his. The fear was sharp and immediate, but his analytical mind, his new default state, quickly suppressed it. Panic was inefficient. He needed data. The glitches were a problem, but his new control method was the solution. He couldn't abandon the project. He had to refine it. He had to apply his hack to the other quirks, not just as a power-up, but as a diagnostic tool. If he could build clean pathways for each of them, perhaps he could reinforce the firewalls around their corresponding vestiges, separating their code from his own. He needed to test it. He needed a controlled environment, and a complex problem. Training Ground Gamma was a twisted skeleton of steel and concrete, a multi-story urban ruin designed by Cementos for disaster simulation. Aizawa stood before the assembled class, his expression as weary as ever, a bundle of capture weapon cloth draped around his neck. "Today's exercise is urban rescue," he said, his voice a tired drawl that commanded absolute attention. "There are 5 training dummies located in structurally compromised positions throughout the building. Your objective is to retrieve all 5 without causing any further structural collapse. Time is a factor. Causing a collapse results in an instant fail. This is a test of precision, not power." His gaze lingered on Bakugo for a moment, who just scoffed in response. The exercise was a nightmare for heavy hitters. The building was a house of cards. A single misplaced explosion or an overly enthusiastic smash would bring the whole thing down. It was a scalpel's work, and most of them were used to wielding sledgehammers. Bakugo went first, with Kirishima as his partner. Their run was a tense, loud affair. Bakugo used a series of tiny, controlled explosions for propulsion, navigating the debris with a surprising amount of finesse, while Kirishima used his unbreakable form to shield them from falling debris. They managed to retrieve 3 dummies before a slightly too large AP shot, meant to clear a path, clipped a load-bearing pillar, and a large section of the 3rd floor pancaked downwards. A loud buzzer signaled their failure. Todoroki and Yayorozu were next. Theirs was a far more elegant attempt. Todoroki created massive, smooth ramps of ice to bypass unstable floors, while Yayorozu created complex harnesses and support braces on the fly. They successfully retrieved 4 dummies, but ran out of time trying to figure out how to extract the 5th, which was trapped under a massive, precariously balanced generator on the top floor. Finally, it was Izuku's turn, paired with Uraraka. As they stood before the entrance, she gave him a determined look. "Okay, Deku. What's the plan? We can make the debris float, and you can get in there with a low-power smash to clear a path." It was a good plan. The standard plan. But Izuku was no longer a standard user. "No," he said, his voice quiet and steady. He closed his eyes for a second. In his mind, he wasn't looking at a crumbling building. He was looking at a 3D schematic, a complex physics problem. He activated danger sense, but not to feel for threats. He focused it, using it like a sonar, feeling the stress points in the structure, the vibrations in the rebar, the exact balance of the teetering generator on the roof. "I have a different approach," he said, opening his eyes. They seemed to glow with a faint internal light. "Achiko, I need you on standby for evac. If anything goes wrong, get the dummies and yourself out." But don't touch anything unless I say so. I'm going in alone. Uraraka looked taken aback, a flicker of hurt in her eyes. Alone? But we're a team. The variables are too complex, he stated, the words coming out colder and more clinical than he intended. Another person's quirk just adds another point of potential failure. Trust me. Before she could argue, he stepped into the ruin. He activated one for all. The usual green lightning was absent. Instead, the faint, geometric circuit patterns flickered to life under his skin. He moved with an eerie silence and a preternatural grace, his feet finding the most stable purchase on the debris-strewn floor, as if he had walked the path 1,000 times. The first dummy was easy, pinned under a fallen steel beam. Brute force was an option, but an inefficient one. Instead, Izuku placed his hands on the beam, and multiple black tendrils erupted from his back. But these were not the wild, lashing whips of his old black whip. They were solid, smooth, and perfectly uniform, like pistons forged from shadow. He was consciously coding their properties. Black whip property set density equals max, set tensile strength equals max, set form equals cylinder. The tendrils slid under the beam and lifted it with a silent, hydraulic press-like motion, creating just enough space for him to pull the dummy free. No shudder, no collateral damage. The second and third dummies were on a hanging section of floor. To reach them, he didn't leap. He generated a single, thin strand of black whip, its tip hardened to a razor's edge. Property set tip hardness equals diamond. He threw it, and it embedded itself deep into a concrete ceiling 50 feet away with a soft thwick. He reeled himself in, his movements perfectly controlled. From the observation room, All Might watched on a monitor, his brow furrowed. He's so quiet, he murmured to Aizawa. Aizawa grunted, his eyes narrowed, never leaving the screen. He's not fighting the environment. He's solving it. There's a difference. The real challenge was the fourth dummy, trapped in a room where the ceiling was sagging, groaning under the weight of the floor above. There was no way to get in without the whole thing collapsing. So, Izuku changed the rules. He stood outside the doorway, his left hand braced against the wall. A thick, massive pillar of black energy sprouted from his back, pressing firmly against the sagging ceiling. Black whip property set form equals support column, set dynamic tension equals active. The pillar groaned but held, taking the strain. Then, from his right arm, he extruded a different kind of tendril. It was thin, almost serpentine. He commanded it to change its state. Property set consistency equals semi-liquid. The black whip flowed like viscous oil, pouring through a small crack in the wall. Inside the room, as seen by the drone camera, the tendrils snaked across the floor, pooling under the trapped dummy. Then, Izuku issued a new command. Property set consistency equals solid, set form equals cradle. The liquid whip instantly hardened into a perfectly form-fitting cage around the dummy's torso. He gently retracted his arm, pulling the dummy right through the crack in the wall, the solid cradle protecting it from scrapes. The final dummy was the one under the generator on the roof. Getting there was easy with his precise black whip grappling. The problem was the generator itself. It weighed several tons and was balanced on a fractured concrete slab. The slightest vibration would send it crashing through every floor of the building. The dummy was wedged tight beneath it. Izuku stood before it, his mind a flurry of calculations. He couldn't lift the generator. He couldn't slide the dummy out. He needed to create an exit. He looked at the reinforced concrete wall behind the generator. He extended a single, finger-thin tendril of black whip, its tip once again hardened to a razor's edge. He began to move with the intense focus of a surgeon. The tendril touched the wall, and with a low hum of energy, it began to cut. It didn't blast or smash. It carved. He sliced a perfect, circular hole in the rebar-reinforced wall, the edges of the cut clean and smooth. Then, using the liquid-to-solid cradle trick again, he extracted the final dummy through his newly created escape hatch. As he rappelled down the side of the building with all 5 dummies, a buzzer sounded, signaling his success. He had completed the exercise in just under 7 minutes. Uraraka ran up to him, her face a mixture of awe and bewilderment. Deku! That was... How did you even think to do that? With black whip? He looked at the tendrils retracting into his arm. I just adjusted its properties, he said simply, as if he were talking about changing the settings on a phone. Back in the observation room, the other students were silent. They had seen him be powerful. They had seen him be heroic. But this was something else. This was a level of control that was frankly terrifying. Bakugo stared at the screen, his fists clenched, a muscle twitching in his jaw. He wasn't angry. He was unsettled. The wild, crying nerd he had known his whole life, the one who won fights with guts and broken bones, had been replaced by a cold, efficient problem-solving engine. It was like watching a different person wear his friend's face. The success of the training exercise was a proof of concept, but the glitches remained. The phantom floating, the alien handwriting, the whispers in the dark. His control over the quirks was growing, but his control over himself felt like it was slipping. He couldn't fix what he couldn't measure. His analysis was based on feeling, on instinct and mental visualization. He needed hard data. He needed to see the energy distribution his costume sensors couldn't pick up. He needed to track the flow inside his body, to see if the glitches corresponded with a measurable energy bleed between quirk nodes. There was only one person on campus who could build the kind of hyper-specific, ridiculously advanced monitoring equipment he needed. He found May Hatsum in her workshop, which looked, as always, as if a hurricane made of spare parts and ambition had recently passed through. Explosions, both miniature and significant, were a constant feature of the soundscape. May, her pink hair tied up in a messy bun and her goggles pushed up on her forehead, was gleefully welding a rocket nozzle onto what appeared to be a toaster. "Hatsum-san?" Izuku called out over the screech of metal. She spun around, her golden eyes magnified by her custom goggles, locking onto him. "Midoriya! My favorite test pilot! Here to try out my new jet-propelled breakfast delivery system? It has a 90% success rate of getting the toast to the target before it gets cold, and only a 40% chance of third-degree burns." No, not today," he said, carefully stepping over a pile of live wires. "I actually have a request. For a new piece of support gear. For me." May's grin widened. All thoughts of the toaster were abandoned. "For you? The walking quirk singularity? I'm listening. What do you need? More impact absorption? A cooling system for your limbs? Boots that can punch people? Something a bit more diagnostic," he began, choosing his words with extreme care. He couldn't mention vestiges or system firewalls. He had to use her language. "I'm working on a new way to regulate my quirk's energy output. My current costume sensors can measure the total power I'm putting out, but that's not what I need. I need to track the flow of the energy inside me, not just the final result. I need to see how the different parts of my quirk are interacting before the power even reaches my fists." He took a breath, hoping the analogy would land. "Think of it like a computer network. I don't need to know the total data downloaded. I need to track the bandwidth usage of each individual application in real time. I need to see the latency, the packet loss, the conflicts." He had said the magic words. May's eyes lit up with the fire of 1,000 suns. The concept of a quirk as a computer network, with bandwidth and latency, was the most beautiful thing she had ever heard. It was her two favorite things, hero tech and raw data, smashed together. "Oh, you are speaking my language!" she squealed, grabbing his arm and pulling him towards a cluttered workbench. "High-fidelity biomonitoring. Real-time energy distribution tracking. Why just use your quirk when you can have graphs? Oh, this is the best baby I've ever been asked to make." She started pulling components from bins, her hands a blur. "We'll need multispectrum energy sensors, a micro-EEG to track neurological correlation, a full biofeedback loop. We can build it into a gauntlet. No, better. A full chest and arm piece. It will map every flicker of your quirk factor. We can watch the energy travel your nervous system like cars on a highway." Izuku watched, relieved and slightly overwhelmed, as she began sketching furiously on a datapad. She was so consumed by the technical challenge, the how, that she didn't even stop to ask why he needed such a thing. To her, the pursuit of data was its own reward. "What will we call this glorious baby?" she mused, tapping a stylus on her chin. "The Midoriya monitor? Too boring. The Power Flow 9000? Cliché. I know, her head snapped up, her eyes gleaming with manic inspiration. We'll call it Baby 347 the Quirk debugger. Izuku stared at her, a chill running down his spine. The name was perfect. Frighteningly, uncannily perfect. It was exactly what he was trying to do. It was a sign, perhaps, that he was on the right path, or a warning that he was becoming dangerously predictable in his obsession. The Quirk debugger, he repeated, the words feeling heavy on his tongue. I like it. He left her workshop an hour later with a promise of a working prototype within the week. He had the tool he needed. He had a way to turn his abstract theories into measurable data. He could finally begin debugging the glitches in earnest. But as he walked back to the dorms, the setting sun casting long shadows before him, Yoichi's whispered words echoed in his memory. What are you doing to us, Ninth? He looked at his own hand, the one that had written in the second user's script. The Quirk debugger would help him fix the system. But he was struck by a terrifying, lonely thought: who was going to debug him? The workshop smelled of solder, ionized air, and Mayhatsum's particular brand of uncontainable genius. Wires snaked across the floor like metallic vines, and the hum of overworked machinery was a constant drone. At the center of this controlled chaos, Izuku Midoriya stood with his right arm extended, watching as May made the final adjustments. Baby 347, the Quirk debugger, was a marvel of miniaturization and obsessive engineering. It was a sleek, matte black gauntlet that covered his hand and forearm, with a secondary harness strapping a small, circular device to the center of his chest. It was far less bulky than he'd anticipated. Faint, hair-thin lines of a phosphorescent green material were etched into its surface, currently dark but ready to light up with data. All right, Deku-kun, May chirped, tightening a final strap on his bicep. Her goggles were perched on her head, and her face was smudged with grease but alight with pure, unadulterated excitement. The biosensors are calibrated, the neurological link is established, and the core processor is, well, it's purring like a kitten. That's also a tiny nuclear reactor. I've slaved the output to the main monitor. Are you ready to make science happen? Izuku's heart hammered against his ribs, a frantic rhythm of anticipation and dread. This was the moment of truth. His theories, his secret hacks, his internal battles, they were about to be translated into cold, hard data on a screen for someone else to see. Ready, he said, his voice steadier than he felt. He took a deep breath and closed his eyes, sinking into the now familiar internal space of One for All. He began with his first trick, the simplest and cleanest of his hacks. He visualized the direct pathway, the isolated stream of energy running from the core to his fist. Route Stream 001. Activating now, he stated, opening his eyes. On his arm, the etched lines of the Quirk debugger flared to life, glowing with a soft green light. On the large monitor across the workshop, a complex 3D hologram of a human nervous system appeared. A single, brilliant line of emerald light traced a path from the solar plexus, down the arm, and pulled in the hand. The lines were clean, the flow was stable. May gasped, her hands flying to her face. It's beautiful! Look at that efficiency! The energy is completely contained within the target pathway. There's virtually no systemic bleed. It's not a flood, it's a laser. How are you doing that? Just focusing my intent. Izuku mumbled, the lie feeling thinner than ever. Focusing your intent doesn't create a 99.8% efficiency rating. She shot back, already typing furiously at a console, her fingers flying across the keys. The data is insane. The baseline systemic stress is almost zero. You're channeling power that should be tearing you apart, but your body is barely registering it as an event. Next, he activated Black Whip. He summoned a single, solid tendril, forming it into a perfect, rigid spear. On the monitor, a second line of energy appeared, this one a deep, pulsing black. It branched off the main green line near his shoulder, a distinct but orderly subroutine. The Quirk debugger displayed its properties in a small text box on the side of the screen. Quirk ID Black Whip. Status stable. Properties density equals 9.8, tensile strength equals max. He then activated Float, just a bare whisper of it. A third line, a shimmering, ethereal silver blue, wrapped around the green and black lines, and his feet lifted a centimeter off the ground. The system was holding. He was running 3 applications simultaneously, and because he had built clean pathways for each, they weren't interfering with each other. He was multitasking his quirk. He was feeling confident. Too confident. The data on the screen was proof that his methods worked. The glitches, the phantom sensations, the alien handwriting, were just bugs in the old code. The solution wasn't to be more cautious. The solution was to go deeper. To stop applying patches and to rewrite the core programming itself. His ambition, fueled by weeks of clandestine progress and the intoxicating validation of maze data, surged past his caution. He could see the next step with perfect, terrifying clarity. Right now, he was manually creating pathways for each quirk, one at a time. It was effective, but slow. What if he didn't have to? What if he could create a master control, a central hub, a root directory from which he could access and combine all the quirks seamlessly, without conscious thought? He needed to get past the individual application files and access the main operating system kernel. The kernel was the heart of the system, the fundamental code that managed everything. In the world of One for All, the kernel was the chaotic, swirling core of the stockpile itself. This is it, he thought, a feverish excitement seizing him. This is how I break the limits for good, Hatsum-san, he said, his voice low and intense. I'm going to try something new. Keep the monitors running. Record everything. May's eyes widened with manic glee. New? New is my favorite flavor. Hit me with your best shot, my little data streamer. He didn't hear her. He was already sinking, diving deeper into his inner world than he ever had before. He bypassed the stormy plains where the vestiges stood. He flew past their server nodes, ignoring their flickering, concerned forms. He was heading for the singularity, the central sun of raw power that held this entire reality together. It was like approaching a star. The raw energy was a physical force, pressing in on his consciousness, threatening to vaporize his sense of self. The whispers of the vestiges grew more frantic, distorted by the sheer power. Ninth, what are you doing? Nana Shimura's voice was a cry of alarm. Stop! You don't understand what that is. Daigoro Banjo's voice was a raw, panicked roar. He ignored them. They were part of the old system. They couldn't comprehend his goals. He reached the edge of the singularity, a roiling, screaming vortex of pure green and white light. This was the source code. The kernel. And he was going to rewrite it. His will was a scalpel. He plunged his consciousness into the vortex, searching for the core programming loops, the master control functions. He was going to create a new command master control interface. A simple, elegant dashboard that would give him absolute, instantaneous control over everything. He found it. A pulsing knot of code at the very heart of the storm. He focused his entire being on it. He began to type his new commands with the language of pure intent. Create UI. Integrate all modules. Redirect primary control to user 9. Back in the physical world, May Hatsum watched her monitor in horror. The clean, stable lines of energy on the 3D hologram began to flicker. The emerald green of One for All wavered, turning a sickly, unstable yellow. The black of Blackwhip and the silver of Float began to corrupt, glitching in and out of existence. Text boxes flew across the screen, a cascade of red, flashing error messages. Error kernel write access violation. Warning catastrophic system failure imminent. Error stack overflow vestige node 07. Error memory leak detected vestige node 05. Midoriya? May shouted, her voice laced with panic. Shut it down! Whatever you're doing, shut it down now! The energy readings are going off the charts, but it's all unstable. It's tearing itself apart. Izuku didn't respond. His eyes were wide open but completely unfocused. His body began to tremble, a low vibration that quickly escalated into a violent shudder. The circuit patterns on the Quirk debugger gauntlet flashed erratically, cycling through a rainbow of corrupted colors. Then the arcing began. Multicolored energy leaped from his skin with a sound like tearing fabric. Green lightning, no longer controlled, lashed out and struck a nearby workbench, vaporizing a wrench. Tendrils of black energy erupted from his back, not as controlled whips, but as jagged, thorny growths that smashed into the ceiling. A thick, choking cloud of gray smoke poured from his mouth and nostrils, filling the room. He floated an inch off the ground, then slammed back down, his body convulsing as the quirks fired randomly, at war with each other. DKU! May screamed, diving behind a reinforced steel table as a bolt of raw power seared the air where she had been standing. The workshop's internal alarms blared to life, a deafening klaxon accompanied by flashing red lights. This wasn't a quirk. This was a meltdown. Inside his mind, Izuku was trapped in hell. His attempt to rewrite the kernel while the system was running had been a catastrophic, fundamentally flawed idea. He hadn't just introduced a bug, he had shattered the very foundation of the operating system. He had caused a kernel panic. The vestige world was gone. In its place was a screaming digital nightmare. The sky was a blizzard of corrupted data, a waterfall of green, cascading characters and error symbols. The ground was a fractured, glitching landscape of black and gray polygons. The air was filled with the shriek of 1,000 dial-up modems trying to connect at once. He was floating bodiless, in the center of the chaos. And the vestiges were monstrosities. He saw Nana Shimura, her form stretched and distorted, her face a frozen mask of agony as she flickered in and out of existence. Daigoro Banjo was a writhing mass of black, thorny code, his roars of fury and pain corrupted into ear-splitting digital screeches. Haikid Shinomori, the fourth, was a flickering, static-filled ghost, danger sense manifesting as phantom needles of pain stabbing randomly into Izuku's own consciousness. They weren't people anymore. They were corrupted files, broken programs trapped in an endless, crashing loop. He had done this to them. His arrogance, his reckless pursuit of control, had broken them, and at the center of it all, where the core of OFA had been, was a screaming vortex of pure chaos. It was no longer a sun of power. It was a black hole, sucking in the fragments of the world, tearing apart the vestiges, and pulling at his own consciousness, threatening to shred him into nothing. He was going to die. Or worse, he was going to be erased. His consciousness deleted, his body left in the real world as a rampaging, uncontrolled nuclear bomb of warring quirks until it inevitably destroyed itself. Despair, cold and absolute, washed over him. He had failed. He had broken the most sacred trust in the world. He had destroyed the legacy of 8 heroes. Then, through the cacophony, a single, clear note emerged. A voice. Calm, stable, and filled with a sorrowful warmth. This was never a perfect design. 9th. A figure began to resolve out of the digital storm. It was faint, almost translucent, but it was stable. It was Yoichi Shigaraki, the first user. He was the only one who seemed untouched by the corruption, his form a gentle, unwavering light in the heart of the nightmare. He was the base code, the original file from which all others had been copied. He was damaged, but not broken. He drifted closer to Izuku's terrified consciousness. His spectral face was etched with a profound sadness. You saw this power as a system to be optimized, Yoichi's voice echoed, not in his ears, but directly in his soul. You are not entirely wrong. But you misunderstand its nature. It is not a machine of cold logic. It is a living thing. It is a family, a legacy of wills bound together by hope and happenstance. Yoichi gestured to the screaming vortex. This quirk was an accident. A miracle. Its ability to grow, to contain the wills and powers of others, it was never designed. It simply happened. Its very foundation is chaos. It is a beautiful, impossible paradox. It is order born from randomness. He looked at Izuku, his eyes filled with a teacher's gentle disappointment. You tried to impose a rigid, logical order onto its inherent beautiful chaos. You tried to rewrite a poem into a mathematical equation. You did not account for the spirit. The system did not just reject your changes. It broke itself in protest. The truth of Yoichi's words slammed into Izuku with the force of a physical blow. He had been so arrogant. He had seen the chaos as a flaw, a bug to be fixed. He had never considered that the chaos was the feature. It was the messy, human, unpredictable element that allowed the quirk to grow and adapt. It was the soul of the machine. I'm sorry. Izuku's thoughts stammered, a desperate plea in the void. I didn't know. Can I fix it? Can I undo it? Yoichi's form flickered, a sign that even his stability was temporary. You cannot fix this with more code. 9th. Logic is what broke this world. Logic will not heal it. You cannot be a hacker now. You must be what you were always meant to be. The black hole pulsed, growing stronger, pulling at them both. The distorted screams of the other vestiges grew louder. You must be a hero, Yoichi said, his voice gaining strength. You cannot command the storm. You must become the eye of it. You cannot reboot the system from the outside. You must perform a system restore from within. Find your core. Not the Quirk's core. Yours. Your will. Your singular, burning desire. The one that All Might saw in you. The one that made you worthy. Izuku's mind raced. His core desire? To be the greatest? To be number one? No, that was his childhood dream. His motivation now was deeper. It was the reason he had sought this power in the first place. The reason he had broken his bones again and again. I want to save everyone. The thought, simple and pure, cut through the digital noise. It was his prime directive. His own, unshakable source code. There, Yoichi whispered, a faint smile on his lips. That is your anchor. That is the master command. Do not try to control the vestiges. Reach out to them. Remind them. Remind this power of its purpose. Its purpose is not efficiency. Its purpose is to save. Yoichi's form began to dissolve, his light fading back into the storm. The system is crashing. 9th. You must restore it to its last stable configuration. Use your heart. It is the only administrator password that has ever truly mattered. His voice faded, leaving Izuku alone once more, floating before the abyss. But he was no longer filled with despair. He had a purpose. He had a command. He turned his consciousness away from the black hole and towards the glitching, tormented form of Nana Shimura. He didn't try to fix her code. He reached out with a feeling, a memory. The memory of her sacrifice, her smile, her unwavering belief in a future where people could live and laugh. He projected his own desperate need to protect that future, to honor her legacy. A flicker of recognition sparked in her distorted form. The digital screaming softened for a moment. He then focused on Daigoro Banjo, the roaring mass of black thorns. He didn't try to command Black Whip. He pushed forward the feeling of righteous fury he felt when he saw someone hurting the innocent, the same fury that had likely driven Daigoro as a hero. He shared his resolve to use that power not for destruction, but for restraint, for capture, for protecting the weak. The thorny mass convulsed, and for a split second, the clear shape of a man's silhouette appeared within it. One by one, he reached out to them. Not as a programmer to his programs, but as a successor to his predecessors. He re-established the connections not with logical pathways, but with shared purpose, with empathy, with his unwavering, almost foolishly optimistic heroic spirit. He was reaffirming the social contract of one for all. Finally, he turned to face the screaming vortex at the heart of his world. He didn't try to rewrite it. He embraced it. He let the raw, chaotic power of the stockpile wash over him, but he held on to his anchor. I want to save everyone. He pushed that single, pure desire into the heart of the storm. It was a tiny point of light against an ocean of chaos, a single candle in a hurricane. But it was enough. The screaming began to subside, replaced by a low, resonant hum. The black hole of chaos stabilized, the destructive pull ceasing. The storm of corrupted data calmed, the digital rains slowing to a drizzle. The world wasn't fixed, but it had stopped breaking. The kernel panic was over. The system restore had begun. In the workshop, the violent thrashing of Izuku's body stopped. The random discharges of multicolored energy ceased. He hung in the air for a moment, eerily still, held aloft by a gentle flicker afloat. The choking smoke began to dissipate. May cautiously peered over the edge of the steel table. She saw him floating there, his eyes closed, his expression peaceful. The Quirk debugger on his arm had stopped flashing erratically. It now glowed with a steady, soft green light. On the main monitor, the cascade of error messages had vanished. In their place was a single line of text, blinking in the center of the screen. System restore in progress. Re-establishing vestige handshakes. System integrity 28%. She had no idea what a vestige handshake was, but she knew a system reboot when she saw one. She watched, her mechanic's mind utterly captivated, as the percentage slowly began to climb. 35%. 42%. 50%. With a soft gasp, Izuku's eyes opened. They were clear. He was back. Float deactivated, and he dropped to the floor, landing silently on the balls of his feet. He looked at his hands, then at May, his face pale and etched with a profound, soul-deep exhaustion. "Are you okay?" May asked, her voice a hesitant whisper. Izuku gave a slow, tired nod. I made a mistake," he said, his voice raspy. "I pushed too far. I tried to rewrite the kernel while the OS was running." May just stared at him, her brain finally catching up. He wasn't speaking in analogies anymore. He was speaking literally. The awe in her eyes was replaced by a look of sheer, unadulterated terror and respect. "You absolute madman," she breathed. "You didn't just hack your quirk. You nearly bricked your own soul." Izuku looked at the monitor, at the slowly climbing percentage. He had pulled it back from the brink, but he knew something had fundamentally changed. He had seen the raw, chaotic truth at the heart of One for All. He had learned its most important lesson not through logic or analysis, but through catastrophic failure. His quest for perfect control was a fool's errand. The key wasn't to eliminate the chaos. It was to harmonize with it. To lead it, not command it. To be its partner, not its master. He had survived the crash. Now, he had to learn how to run the newly restored, and forever altered, system. The 2 days following the kernel panic were a period of profound and unsettling quiet for Izuku Midoriya. Outwardly, he went through the motions of a UA student. He attended classes, ate meals with his friends, and participated in light training exercises. But inwardly, a massive, system-wide restoration was in progress. He was a machine running in safe mode, his higher functions throttled while his core programming was painstakingly recompiled. He could feel the changes happening deep within him. The connection to the vestiges was no longer a series of discrete lines he had to consciously hack into. After his desperate, heart-driven system restore, the connections were reforming on their own, not as rigid, logical pathways, but as something more organic, more intuitive. It was like the difference between a mechanical limb and a biological one. The first was a tool to be commanded, the second was a part of himself, to be moved by instinct. His friends noticed the shift, but couldn't place its source. "You're quiet, Midoriya," Ida commented during lunch, his hand gestures precise as always, though his brow was furrowed with concern. "Quieter than usual. Are your studies proving to be excessively taxing?" "He's just tired from being so awesome during Aizawa-sensei's rescue drill," Uraraka chimed in, though she too cast a worried glance his way. "Right, Deku-kun?" Izuku offered a small, tired smile. "Something like that. Just thinking a lot." He wasn't lying. He was thinking, processing, and integrating at a speed that left him mentally exhausted. He was beginning to understand what Yoichi had meant. He wasn't just the user of One for All anymore. He was its guardian, its administrator, its partner. His will, his desire to save everyone, had become the central governing principle, the prime directive around which the entire, chaotic system was now reorganizing itself. The change manifested in small, strange ways. He no longer felt the phantom glitches of the vestiges' personalities bleeding into his own. The firewall had been restored, stronger than before. But now, he had a constant, low-level awareness of them in the background of his thoughts, not as voices, but as presences. Nana's calm determination, Daigoro's righteous fury, Yoichi's quiet resolve. They were a silent council, their wills and experiences now a part of his own intuitive databank. The true test, however, had yet to come. He hadn't dared to access the full, unrestrained power of his patched quirk. He was afraid of what might happen, afraid of the sheer scale of the change. He was a man who had completely rebuilt his car's engine, but hadn't yet dared to turn the key. The world, however, does not wait for a hero to feel ready. The alarm that ripped through the UA campus was not the familiar, blaring klaxon of a training exercise. It was the high, piercing shriek of a genuine emergency, a citywide threat alert. Every student's phone buzzed with the same stark message from the Hero Public Safety Commission. Villain Alert Level A. Location Muzutafu, Hoshi Ward, Sector 4. Nature of Threat Unidentified NOMU. High Mobility, High Regeneration. All available Pro Heroes to engage. UE students with provisional licenses are cleared for support roles under Pro Hero command. Chaos erupted in the common room. Students scrambled, shouting, pulling on their hero costumes. Izuku's own blood ran cold. Noma. The word itself was a visceral trigger, a harbinger of unnatural strength and mindless destruction. He moved on autopilot, his body already pulling on his costume, his mind a sudden, crystal-clear sea of calm. The exhaustion he had felt for the past 2 days evaporated, replaced by a cold, sharp focus. He could feel danger sense, not as a spike of alarm, but as a clear, humming signal, a red icon blinking on his internal heads-up display, confirming the reality of the threat. As he finished strapping on his iron-soled boots, the door to the common room burst open. It was Endeavor, his face a grim mask, flames already licking at his shoulders. Bakugo and Todoroki, already in their gear, were right behind him. We're heading out now, Endeavor's voice boomed, leaving no room for argument. The target is confirmed as a high-end variant, but its capabilities are unknown. Shoto, Bakugo, Midoriya, you're with me. Your combined firepower and mobility are our best assets. The rest of you, await instructions from the other faculty members. Do not engage the primary target. There were no protests. The gravity of the situation was absolute. As they sprinted out of the building towards the city, the distant sounds of explosions and screams were already audible, a grim soundtrack to their mission. Izuku ran, his mind and Quirk in a state of perfect, silent equilibrium. He could feel one for all humming beneath his skin, not as a raging storm to be tamed, but as a vast, powerful engine, idling, awaiting his command. Hoshi Ward was a war zone. The wide, 6-lane boulevard that cut through the commercial district was a landscape of craters, overturned cars, and shattered glass. Plumes of black smoke billowed from nearby buildings, and the air was thick with the smell of burnt plastic and concrete dust. At the center of the destruction was the Noma. It was unlike any Izuku had seen before. It wasn't a hulking brute like the one at the USJ. This one was slender, almost disturbingly graceful, with a lean, corded musculature visible beneath its dark, mottled gray skin. Its exposed brain was smaller, more compact, and pulsed with a sickly yellow light. Its arms ended not in hands, but in long, wicked-looking blades of bone, and its legs were digitigrade, like a raptor's, allowing for incredible bursts of speed. It moved with a twitchy, insect-like quickness that was horrifyingly unnatural. Endeavor was already engaged, a roaring inferno of focused rage. He unleashed a flash-fire fistjet burn, a concentrated blast of plasma that streaked across the battlefield and engulfed the Nomu. For a moment, the creature was lost in the heart of a miniature sun. Any normal villain would have been incinerated. The Nomu, however, simply stepped out of the flames, its skin blackened and steaming, but already healing. The charred flesh bubbled and sloughed off, replaced by fresh, gray skin in a matter of seconds. It tilted its head, its vacant eyes fixing on Endeavor, and then it vanished. It moved so fast it seemed to teleport, reappearing directly behind the flame hero, its bone blades scything through the air. "Dad!" Todoroki yelled, and a massive wall of ice erupted from the ground, intercepting the blades just in time. The Nomu's attack shattered the wall, sending shards of ice exploding outwards. "Damn monster!" Bakugo roared, propelling himself into the air with a series of explosions. Howitzer impact. He unleashed his signature move, a massive, swirling vortex of explosive power that descended on the Nomu. The creature was blasted off its feet, sent tumbling through the air and smashing through the facade of a department store. Bakugo landed, breathing heavily. Did that get it? Before the dust even settled, the Nomu burst from the hole it had made, its body mangled and twisted, bones sticking out at unnatural angles. But even as it flew through the air, it was regenerating. Its limbs snapped back into place with audible cracks, its wounds sealing over. By the time it landed, crouched and ready on the street, it was completely unharmed. "Its regeneration quirk is off the charts," Endeavor grunted, wiping a trickle of sweat from his brow. "And its speed is faster than anything I've seen. We can't put it down with brute force alone." It was then that Izuku arrived, landing silently on the edge of a crater. His friends and Endeavor turned to look at him, and they all saw it. The change. There was no frantic muttering, no nervous energy. The wild green lightning of full cowl was absent. He stood with a quiet, intense calm, his body perfectly still, his eyes glowing with a soft, emerald light. He wasn't radiating the overwhelming pressure of a hero about to unleash his power. He was exuding the unnerving stillness of a master craftsman observing a complex piece of machinery before beginning his work. Midoriya, Endeavor said, a note of uncertainty in his voice. What's your status? Izuku didn't answer immediately. His gaze was locked on the Nomu. He was analyzing it, his mind processing data at an incredible rate. Danger sense wasn't just warning him of attacks. It was giving him a low-level schematic of the Nomu's next movements, a predictive model of its twitchy, erratic patterns. He could feel the flow of energy within the creature's body as it prepared to move, a subtle shift in its biological field. He had access to his council of vestiges, their combined experience now an intuitive part of his thought process. The second and third users, veterans of a brutal era, provided a cold, tactical analysis of the Nomu's fighting style. Nana Shimura's presence offered a sense of aerial positioning and maneuverability. Haikid Shinomori's danger sense was the targeting system. Daigoro Banjo's black whip was the tool. And smokescreen was the misdirection. And F.A. Gene was the catalyst. All the programs were online. All the modules were integrated. I have a plan, Izuku said, his voice calm and clear, cutting through the chaos. Keep it distracted. I need to get close. Before anyone could argue, he moved. But he didn't charge forward. He took a single step and seemed to dissolve. OFA execute, he whispered, the command an internal trigger, not a shouted declaration. He activated smokescreen. But it wasn't the clumsy, vision-obscuring cloud he used to produce. He didn't fill the area with smoke. Instead, he released a dozen, perfectly controlled puffs of dense, gray smoke. And as he released them, he used a micro-burst of air force to shape them, giving each one a distinct, humanoid form. He then used a flicker of float on each smoky shape, giving them just enough lift and movement to appear real. The result was astonishing. A dozen solid-looking clones of himself instantly appeared on the battlefield, each one running, dodging, and weaving. They were perfect illusions, lacking physical substance but indistinguishable from the real thing to the naked eye. The Nomu, its simple, programmed brain overwhelmed by the sudden influx of targets, froze for a half-second, its head twitching back and forth as it tried to decide which one to attack. That half-second was all Izuku needed. While the smoke clones scattered, the real Izuku, now cloaked by the confusion, shot forward. He wasn't using full cowl. He was using a refined version of F.A. Gene. He kept a continuous, low-level loop of kinetic energy flowing through his legs, allowing for a rapid series of small, silent, explosive bursts of speed. He moved across the broken street without a sound, a green blur weaving between his own illusions. The Noma finally chose a target, lunging at one of the smoke clones. Its bone blades passed through the illusion harmlessly. As it tried to correct, another clone attacked from the side, and it spun to meet it. It was completely bamboozled. What is that, Quirk? Bakugo muttered, his eyes wide with disbelief as he watched the Noma swatting at smoke. Izuku was now within 10 meters of the real target. He needed to immobilize it. The problem was its immense strength. Any simple binding would be snapped instantly. He needed something more complex, something it couldn't simply break. He leaped into the air, and Black Whip erupted from his arms and back. But again, this was a new application of the power. It wasn't a flurry of wild tendrils. It was a stream of liquid black energy, like a 3D printer's nozzle extruding a complex design in midair. He wove the tendrils around the Nomu, creating an intricate, three-dimensional cage of overlapping, interlocking strands. As the final strand connected, he issued a single mental command: harden. The liquid black energy instantly solidified with a low, resonant hum, becoming a complex, geodesic cage of what looked like polished obsidian. The Nomu was trapped, roaring and thrashing, but the cage was designed to distribute the force of its struggles across its entire structure. It held firm. The smoke clones dissipated, their purpose served. Izuku landed softly on the other side of the captured Nomu, not even breathing heavily. The entire sequence had taken less than 5 seconds. Endeavor, Todoroki, and Bakugo could only stare in stunned silence. He hadn't just used his quirks, he had combined them, scripted them, into a single, flawless sequence of events. It was less like a fight and more like a perfectly executed program. The Nomu, however, was not finished. A new, horrifying sound emerged from its throat, a high-frequency shriek. The bone blades on its arms began to vibrate, glowing with a faint red energy. It was using a resonance frequency to try and shatter the cage from the inside. Cracks began to appear in the black whip structure. "It's breaking free," Todoroki warned, preparing a wave of ice. "It's not enough to trap it," Izuku said, his eyes still locked on the creature. His mind was working, danger sense feeding him information on the Nomu's core. Its regeneration was fueled by a central, supercharged organ in its chest, a biological battery. As long as that core was intact, it could heal from anything. I have to destroy the source. He needed overwhelming, focused firepower. He needed to hit that core with a single, precise, unstoppable blow. He began the final sequence. He started tapping his foot, a soft, rhythmic motion. With each tap, he charged FA gene, storing kinetic energy. But he wasn't storing it for a single, massive release. He was storing it in a continuous, stable loop, like charging a capacitor. The familiar silver shimmer of the quirk began to glow around his legs. He used Black Whip to fire dozens of thin tendrils into the surrounding debris, chunks of concrete, twisted car doors, shattered lampposts. He imbued each and every piece of debris with a small, precise packet of the stored FA gene energy. Endeavor watched, his mind, so used to the straightforward application of overwhelming power, struggling to comprehend the intricate preparations. "Midoriya, what are you doing? Attack it now. The target is immobilized but not secured," Izuku replied calmly, not taking his eyes off the Noma as the cracks in its cage widened. "A direct attack is inefficient. Too much risk of collateral damage, and a high probability of the target evading at the last moment if the cage fails." He finished his preparations. He now had 37 separate pieces of debris, ranging in size from a brick to a car engine, all floating in the air around him, held by black whip tendrils, each one humming with stored kinetic energy. He raised a single hand. "Orphe execute," he whispered again. Kinetic cascade. He released the black whip tendrils and the FA gene energy simultaneously. The debris became a guided missile barrage. Each piece shot forward with incredible velocity, not in a straight line, but in a complex, corkscrewing trajectory that he guided with minute adjustments to the black whip strands still attached to them. The Noma finally shattered its cage with a triumphant roar, just as the first wave of the attack hit. It wasn't a single, powerful impact. It was a series of a dozen, rapid-fire strikes. A chunk of concrete smashed into its knee, staggering it. A twisted piece of rebar pierced its shoulder. A car door, spinning like a saw blade, slammed into its side. The Noma tried to move, to dodge, but the barrage was relentless and came from all directions. It was being pinned, staggered, and disoriented by a swarm of kinetic projectiles. It was death by 1,000 cuts. While the Noma was pinned under the relentless assault, Izuku prepared the finishing blow. He floated into the air with Nana's quirk, rising above the chaos. He reared back his right arm. This time, he didn't use a clean, hacked pathway for a small percentage. He was doing the opposite. He was opening the floodgates, but he was doing it with the full knowledge and cooperation of the entire system. He could feel the vestiges lending their strength, their wills aligning with his. He felt the raw, chaotic power of the core stockpile, the power that had almost destroyed him, surging into his arm. But this time, it wasn't a chaotic flood. His will, his purpose, was the channel. The desire to end the threat, to protect the people behind him, formed the vessel for the power. He used all his quirks at once, a perfect synthesis. Float gave him his position. Danger sense gave him the precise location of the Noma's core, a glowing red target in his mind's eye. Black whip tendrils erupted from his back, anchoring him to nearby buildings, bracing him for a recoil that he knew would still exist at this level of power. Fa gene discharged the last of its stored energy directly into the punch, a final, explosive catalyst. The raw power of One for All swirled around his arm, a miniature galaxy of green energy. But it wasn't just green. Interwoven within the lightning were threads of black, silver, gray, and crimson, the colors of the other quirks, all perfectly integrated, forming a beautiful, terrifying circuit of ultimate power. He didn't aim for the Noma's head or its chest. He aimed for the core. He dove. St. Louis. Smash! His fist connected. The impact was not a wide, destructive explosion. It was a focused, drilling, armor-piercing strike. All of that incredible, multifaceted power was concentrated into a single, infinitesimal point. The world seemed to go silent for a moment, and then a beam of pure, multicolored light erupted from the Noma's back, punching straight through it. The Noma froze, its head tilted upwards. The light in its exposed brain flickered and died. The regeneration stopped. The creature that had been shrugging off jet burns and howitzer impacts simply switched off. It hung in the air for a second, a hollowed-out shell, before crumbling into a pile of fine gray dust that was scattered by the wind. Izuku landed, his right arm steaming, the sleeve of his costume vaporized. The limb ached with a deep, resonant pain, a sign that even his new control had its limits when faced with that level of output. But nothing was broken. The recoil was managed, distributed, and contained. Silence descended on the ruined boulevard. The public, who had been watching from a safe distance, the other heroes, the news helicopters hovering overhead, all were left in stunned, disbelieving silence. Bakugo stared at the spot where the Noma had been, then at Deku. His usual explosive anger was gone, replaced by a look of profound, frustrated awe. What the hell was that? He breathed. Todoroki's eyes were wide, the flames on his left side having extinguished themselves without him noticing. He had just witnessed a level of power and control he hadn't known was possible. Endeavor lowered his arms, his own flames dying down. He looked at the dust of the Noma, then at the young man who stood calmly amidst the destruction. He, the number one hero, had been a supporting player. He had been a distraction. He saw the boy, but he also saw the legacy within him, not as a simple torch passed down, but as a weapon that had been reforged, sharpened, and perfected into something terrifyingly new. Izuku Midoriya stood, his internal systems slowly returning to idle, the presences of the vestiges receding into the quiet background of his mind. The patch was live. The new operating system was fully functional. He had not just won the fight. He had demonstrated a new kind of power, a new paradigm for what it meant to wield One for All. And he knew, with a certainty that chilled him to the bone, that a watching, waiting evil would have felt this shift, this fundamental rewriting of the rules. The game had changed, and he was now player one.